Ever been to Traverse City, Michigan? I have, on purpose. Because in his gripping bestseller entitled What's So Amazing About Grace, Philip Yancey has a passage where he rewrites the story of the prodigal son. And on the back jacket of the book, a reviewer named Brennan Manning has this to say: the crowning jewel of all books. And then comes this warning. If you read the chapter, The Lovesick Father, and do not weep for joy, I suggest you check your pulse or make an appointment with your mortician. And then Yancey tells his story of how a young girl in Traverse City, Michigan, this teenager, decides that dad is stupid and home is stupid and church is stupid and she wants to leave for the big city. So she does. She runs away to Detroit and ends up making a living the same way many other homeless girls do. A guy with a big car, the boss, gets her all set up with a nice penthouse suite with room service and limo rides and men who pay handsomely for the tricks she knows. But drugs wear down her body, and soon, with the dark circles around her eyes, she can't command the same prices as before. The next day, the boss throws her out, and things get harder and harder. Winter. She's homeless. She's sleeping on metal grates outside the department stores with the heat coming up through a dark, hard Detroit winter. And finally she has the moment of coming to her senses. Maybe I'll go back home, she says to herself. So she calls, but she just gets the answering machine. Dad, Mom, it's me, she says. I was wondering about maybe coming home. I'm catching a bus up your way and it'll get there about midnight tomorrow. If you're not there, well, I guess I'll just stay on the bus until it hits Canada. So she rides and she practices over and over again the speech of how she's been so sorry. She's been so foolish. Dad, Mom, can you ever forgive me? And as the bus gets closer, her heart is pounding. What if they never even got the message? What if they're not there? They get to Traverse City, and she realizes that the next 15 minutes will decide her life, and it's pure terror for her. According to the math of the world, she ought to get nothing, zip, and she knows it. No forgiveness, no welcome back, no making up for how she's slapped everyone in the face. Is that how it will be? Or will Dad even be there? Well, here's the finish to the story. In Yancey's own words, she walks into the terminal not knowing what to expect. Not one of 1,000 scenes that have played out in her mind prepare her for what she sees. There, in the concrete walls and plastic chairs of this bus terminal in Traverse City, Michigan, stands a great big group of 40 brothers and sisters and great aunts and uncles and cousins and a grandmother and great-grandmother to boot. And they're all wearing goofy party hats and blowing noisemakers, and taped across the entire wall of the terminal is a computer-generated banner that reads, "Welcome home." Out of the crowd of well-wishers breaks her dad, and she stares out through the tears quivering in her eyes like hot mercury, and she begins the little memorized speech. Daddy, I'm so sorry. I know. And he interrupts her. Hush, child. We've got no time for that. No time for apologies. You'll be late for the party. A banquet's waiting for you back home, and the whole town is here to celebrate. End of story. In the Bible, and on page 51 of this wonderful, wonderful book entitled What's So Amazing About Grace. But right here, you and I can simply get out the biggest trash bin we can find and throw into it every math textbook we can find. Every book about philosophy, every book about sensible business principles, every calculator which says that 2 and 2 is 4, every diary where a record is kept of someone else's wrongs, every scorecard, every set of scales where things are out of balance. And you just keep throwing out and throwing out because this strange and wonderful story of the prodigal son just turns the universe upside down. Because here's a kid who deserves nothing. Nothing. He's already got his share, and he used it up. He burned up his account down to zero. And he staggers home, knowing full well that he deserves zero in return. His only hope is to maybe get a minimum wage, $5.75 an hour, working on Dad's farm. He doesn't even deserve that after all the "I hate yous" that he shouted on his way out. But here in verse 20, we discover the new math of heaven. But while he was still a long ways off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him and ran to his son, threw his arms around him and kissed him. And now comes the stupid speech. The son says to him, "Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son." But the father interrupts and says to the son, "Shut your mouth. No time for apologies." Here's verse 22. But the father says to his servants, "Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate, for this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found." I guess math-wise, this is a stupid story. Psychology-wise, this is a stupid story. I imagine even the late Dr. Benjamin Spock would say, that is a stupid story. But here is the mathematics of heaven. A kid uses up the whole family fortune, but Dad gives him back and restores him to a whole new family fortune. Not as a servant, not a prison parolee with a record to live down. He's back as a son. In his book, Parables of the Kingdom, Morris Venden points out how all three of the dad's gifts right here are hugely symbolic. The boy says, "I have sinned," and he receives a rich robe to cover the shame of his sins, his rags. He says, "I'm not worthy to be your son." But the dad doesn't even hear him. He immediately gives the boy his signet ring to wear, a symbol of reinstatement into the family. The boy, hardly able to get in a word edgewise, says, "Dad, wait, let me just be a servant." But before he can finish the sentence, Dad has him with a brand new pair of shoes. And of course, in that Judean culture, the servants and the slaves didn't wear shoes. They went barefoot. Only a trusted son would have shoes on. This father gives his son the very gifts that demonstrate the wonderfully strange, different mathematics of heaven. God's equation of grace. Amazing grace. And every one of us is in this story. We've all taken the inheritance down to zero. Not one of us has anything good in us to recommend us to the dad we rejected. Oh, you may still have a few dollars left of good deeds and obedience and so-called loyalty left in your pocket. But the Bible teaches that we're all sinners. We've all wandered away. And we've all dreamed of making a comeback in our own power, at least getting hired on as servants next time instead of sons and daughters. Maybe you've been wondering since we started about this title, Diary of a Prodigal Father. Isn't it the son who was prodigal? Is this a typo? No. A number of years ago, you remember this story. A young man who basically spurned his wife finally comes to his senses. How could I have been so foolish, he wonders. She loved me so much, and I didn't realize. I will arise and go home to her. And at the house, he tries to find her in the crowd. "Hello, I'm looking for my wife." And he begins this long prodigal son speech. "Honey, I was so foolish. I need you. Please forgive me. Please take me back." And he goes on for about 3 minutes until she cuts him off. "Just shut up," she says very softly. And then just like the dad in this story, she adds, "You had me at hello." She throws out the old math of revenge and divorce and "I want so much alimony," and says to the man she loves with such an incredible love, "Jerry Maguire, shut up with your foolish, unnecessary speech because you had me at hello." And so who is it who is prodigal? Get out your Webster's dictionary. Did you know what prodigal really means? It refers to wild, reckless, wasteful, lavish spending, giving profusely, abundantly, overwhelming, overflowing generosity, which the son in this story certainly did during his Las Vegas days. But how much more prodigal is the dad in how much he loves. After giving away the family fortune, which is frittered away, the son who returns is handed the keys to the bank again. Talk about prodigal. Talk about excessive. This is truly the story of the prodigal dad. And maybe this story right here is God's way of waking you up. You can't even get home by yourself. But Dad has a return ticket for you. And it absolutely does not matter what you've done. 100 sins, 1,000,000, 1,000,000,000, small or big, white lies or huge lies, small sins or vile offenses, doesn't matter. Pile them up as high as you can, doesn't matter. Make a list as long as the Constitution, doesn't matter. Because the math of heaven, the grace of God, the prodigal love of the Father simply throws it all out. You start with your speech, God tells you to stop. He's not interested in that. He just wants to get started with the robe and the ring and the shoes and the party. Oh, and that's one more thing about the math of heaven. They seem to be able to afford an awful lot of parties for prodigals up there.